What's going on, everyone? This is Ryan with Automatic Comics. We've got an interesting video here today. I decided to make this one based on a video I recently saw that was done by Mint Hunter Comics, where basically he said, or the premise of the video was, don't grade comics ever. So the idea behind that video was that raw comics sell for the same price as graded comics, and so you shouldn't bother getting your comics graded. If you're going to sell them, just sell them raw, and you won't have the time and expense and everything that goes with that. And while I agree with that to an extent, I think it's more nuanced than that. And so when you look at when I saw that video, I generally knew it was going to be, for the most part, lower dollar books. And when I say lower dollar, I mean 500 or less, somewhere in that range. And I realize that that can be very expensive for one person. Lower dollar isn't the same across the board. But when you're talking about grading, for the most part, 500 or less. There were some examples above that, but generally that's the case. And the other side of it is that if you're picking and choosing examples, it is very easy to find examples that meet what you're trying to present. Okay. And so I thought I would look at this from a little broader perspective and give you an idea for some books. We're going to focus on the copper age because that's where a lot of this sits. And so where some books, when you should decide to get a book graded. Now, the other side of this is that if you're buying a comic, it also shows you that there's a lot of times where you should be buying the graded comic. A lot of people, it seems, are way overpaying for raw books. And so we've seen this big shift in the collectible space with comics. And so it used to be, I'd say maybe like 10, 15 years ago, there was a huge gap between raw book prices and graded prices. And you'd have people buy books raw for like next to nothing, get them graded and sell them for double, triple, quadruple with almost no work. Right. And like I talk to people and they're like, oh yeah, I bought my Amazing Fantasy 15 for $1,000 and it was like a 4 or 5 or a 5. And even at that point, it was worth way, way more than that graded. And so just a huge gap. And then as time has gone on, that gap has closed. And it seems like over the last, few years, in some places, raw books are actually going for more than graded. And so when that happens, like, just buy the graded book. If you don't want it graded, just crack it out then at that point. But if you're buying that book raw, like, you don't really know what you're getting. And, for all the argument about like grading and everything like that, like, at least when you're buying what's graded, you are fairly certain what you're getting is what is advertised. And so like, there are also cases where just buy the book graded. Don't bother buying it raw. But let's start getting into this. So the first book that I wanted to talk about, and I'm using cover price because I often use GPA and Go Collect, but Cover Price has a feature that I really like that's perfect for this. And it's that you have both raw prices and graded prices. And obviously I know like a raw price is a little harder to, or we'll say a raw grade is a little harder to estimate because you're having to base it on whatever pictures are there, what the person maybe advertised it as, that kind of thing. But when you average that over multiple sales, which is what we're doing here, you get a better picture of it. And I'll show you that you can obviously, like, you can pick and choose things to fit your narrative if you want. We're trying to just show like, what is it on the average? So we're going to start with Amazing Spider-Man 300. And with Amazing Spider-Man 300, we're going to go down and we're going to look at the sales for this book. And so you've got the raw sales and you've got the slab sales. Now, obviously the slab sales, you have very specific grades and numbers because they are graded. With raw sales, you have more of a range because one, you can't always necessarily trust how somebody's grading something. And, you only have so much on the pictures and all of that. But with Amazing Spider-Man 300, it's, this is one where I feel like, and he talked about Amazing Spider-Man 300 in his video, that there are very few cases where you should actually get this book graded. And this is why when I talked about that collection that I bought recently with Aaron, I had said, I personally, I did not want to get the Amazing Spider-Man 300 graded because I actually thought that we would effectively lose money by getting it graded and selling it. Not actually lose money, but overall take home lose money by getting it graded versus selling it raw. But Aaron wanted to get it graded, so we're getting it graded. But you can see that here, where you see the raw prices. Near mint, 450, very fine, 375, fine, 264, very good, 343. And you can see that it's based on actual sales. That's why it's not necessarily, just climbing up. And then look over here at the graded prices. I mean, very fine, going for the same price as raw. Go down into the fine range, going for $20, $30 more, maybe a little bit more in some cases, but $20 to $30 more than the raw price. The very good, like down here, there's hardly even any sales because it's a relatively modern book, but you can see like $343 versus this $300 sale. So until you get up into this super high grade range, even 9.6. And if you're buying a raw book that somebody's selling as 9.6, you got to think twice because you're taking a big gamble there, just as the buyer. But even 9.6, it's hardly worth it. Like you can see, there've been some sales recently above the 9.6 price. So the only grade for an Amazing Spider-Man 300 where it's legitimately worth getting it graded is a 9.8 right now on the averages. Now, obviously, like I said, you can go into the details. You can go into the actual detailed sales numbers, and you can find ranges. And so in some cases, if here's the raw sales for this, like you can see, like there are lower prices and there are higher prices. And so there might be some cases where it is worthwhile to pick it up. But that's why we're looking at this in the aggregate, because that's really what gives you a true picture of when you should really get a book graded or not. And from what I can see with Amazing Spider-Man 300, you should really only get it graded if it's a 9.8, almost to a 9.8 pre-screen with them. And otherwise, like just buy the book graded. Like you have no idea what you're getting over here for sure. Even if the pictures are really clear, is there a stain that's hidden? Is there a small tear that's hidden? Is there, something else like a detached, partially detached centerfold? Like you don't know what you're missing there versus a graded book. And it's like, I know people might say like, oh, you're shilling for graded books, but no, like in terms of value, until the 9.8, your value is in the graded book. That is what I would buy. All right, let's move on to the next one here. We're going to go to Amazing Spider-Man 252. So Amazing Spider-Man 252 is a little bit different story. And I'm specifically looking at the direct sales with these, not the newsstand sales. Amazing Spider-Man 252 is a little different story. And when you look at this, you see like even up into the near mint range, you have trouble getting above about $150 for this book raw. And I've seen that too. Like I've sold these books raw, and that's why this one we're getting graded, and I think it's worthwhile to get this book graded. And so you can see here, like up into the near mint, $150 to $160. And you can see here 9.2, 247, 9.4, 270, 9.6, 354 versus 203. Like it's just, there's more value in the book. If it's costing you more than about if it's about a $50 difference or less, you might as well not get it graded because you're with your grading costs, the shipping, everything like that, your time, all of that. But if you're going to be making $50 or more additional value with that book, you should get it graded if you're selling. And so you can see here with the 252, it really is worthwhile to get a 252 graded on average if that book is above a 9.0. Once you start getting below a 9.0, you can see here, here's an outlier, I'd say like $70, but we have a 122, 135 for a very good. When you get down into these price points, these books, don't bother getting them graded. You're just throwing your money away. If you want to sell the book, you can sell it raw. But if you are above a 9.0, if you think that book is going to get above a 9.0, you should get that book graded. You're going to add additional value to your book. All right, let's move on to the next one here. So the next one, I thought this one was really interesting. So this is another one that we sent in, and obviously, like based on what you're going to see here, like in terms of value, we should not have sent this book in. So we're going to do Secret Wars 8, Origin of the Symbiote here. And so 252, if you don't know, that was basically the first black suit. We've got Origin of the Symbiote, Origin of the Black Suit. When you look at the pricing for this book, raw versus graded, unless you're getting a 9.9, there is almost no grade where it is worth getting your book graded. You could make an outside argument for a 9.8. But I mean, even this last sale here, $460 for a 9.6 plus range. $469, last sale $430 for a 9.8. Someone paid more for a raw than the last 9.8 sale. Like, this to me is just, things have switched too hard on that book. Like, or you'd say like almost like the value has gone down more than you even should, or something. There's just, it's very, very weird with this book. Secret Wars 8. I mean, in almost any grade, just does not look like it's worthwhile to get that book graded. You will lose money effectively getting that book graded if you're selling it. And so, I mean, I would say unless you are like confident your book is getting a 9.9, do not get that book graded. I mean, maybe a 9.8, like I said, like maybe, but even that, Secret Wars 8, don't get it graded right now, at least. Or if you're buying it, buy the book graded. Like, buy a 9.6, buy a 9.6 or a 9.4. The value is, you're getting more value out of the book graded than you are raw. And if you don't like graded books, just crack it out when you get it. Seems that simple. All right, let's move on to the next one. Copper Age is you would think that with Copper Age, you would need the books, or they wouldn't need to be quite as high a grade. Like with Moderns, you understand it's like 9.8 or nothing. But I mean, for a lot of the Copper Age, it is 9.8 or nothing as well. And here's another example. X-Men 266, first full appearance of Gambit. The one everybody wants. Nobody wants X-Men Annual 14, right? So this one as well. I mean, look at this. 9.0 to 9.4, you're getting like $150, even getting $150 in the very fine range, even down into the fine range. Again, look here. You're getting, in some cases, again, more for the book raw than graded. And I think some of that comes to the gambling mentality of grading, that people think they're like, oh, if I buy this one, maybe I can get that 9.8 or something out of it. But even if you get the 9.6, it's barely worth it. Like barely worth it. If you buy one that's advertised as a 9 or an 8 or something, you get a 9.6, and that's a big gap. But you can see here, like the 9.6 plus, even at a 9.6, it's not worth it. At a 9.8, the value is there. So X-Men 266, just like Amazing Spider-Man 300, unless that book is a 9.8, and we submitted one, and I thought it was a 9.6, Aaron thought it was a 9.8. And so that one, it's on that edge of it being worth it to send in, right? And so, but X-Men 266, like, if you're going to buy the book, just buy the graded book. Don't buy it raw. And if you're looking to sell it raw, unless you are thinking you're going to get a 9 out. Now, there are going to be some caveats to this, and I'll talk about those at the end of this video as well. All right, let's look up another one here. We've got New Mutants 98, first appearance of Deadpool. Here's another one, though, that is actually generally pretty worthwhile to get that book graded, or at least you're not losing money getting the book graded from roughly a 9.0 and above. So we've got New Mutants 98. You can see here, like in the 7 to 8.5 range, around $300, and you go down here in that range, it's selling for less graded. So if you're at the lower end, kind of like, and for a book from this era, I'd call like VF almost like a lower end. So if you're VF or less, if you're selling it, like, sell the book raw. And if you're buying it, like, you should really be looking at it graded, like you're getting more value graded. Now, if you start to get to the 9.0 and above range, you can see like 9.0 to 9.4, roughly 250, 9.6 plus 347. So you can see you have a big enough gap here from the 9.6 and above, $100 to $700 in a gap there. From the 9 to 9.4, you're about $60 to $100 in gap. So you're not losing money even if you get the 9, and you're making a little extra money at around a 9.4. So New Mutants 98, First Appearance of Deadpool, if you have a pretty nice copy and you get it for roughly what the market is in a raw book, it is worthwhile to get it graded if it's a 9.0 plus type book. Below that, it is not. Above that, it's worth it. All right, now let's jump over to DC. So we're going to take a look at Swamp Thing number 37. First appearance of John Constantine. Cool Swamp Thing cover. It's always super recognizable, the yellow cover, Swamp Thing on there, and that kind of like the green, almost like tracing. So first appearance of John Constantine. This one, very similar. Again, this, if it's a 9.6 or higher, it is roughly worthwhile. Now, we don't have any sales in this very high grade since 2021, so you can't really use that. But if we go to the 9 to 9.4 range, I mean, look at this, like $240, 9.0, 240, 288, 272. It's just not worth it. Now, when you get to 9.6 or 9.8, granted, we don't have the sales data, so it's tough to say, but if you could make some guesstimates around what someone might try to sell that for, around $300 or so. And so I'd say super high grade, worthwhile. Otherwise, I mean, look at this, like a fine going for 225 to 200 over here. That's in like $150 range. Like, again, selling for more raw than graded. And so, I mean, it's generally across the board with these Copper Age books that unless it's like 9.6 and in a lot of cases 9.8 or better, you should not get the book graded. There are a couple exceptions that from the ones we've looked at, Amazing Spider-Man 252, X-Men, and New Mutants 98, a 9.0 plus worthwhile. But the other ones, like, I mean, the Secret Wars 8 was a big surprise. It's just almost not worth it in any grade. Now we're going to jump to one that's a little bit more modern, and then we're going to jump to one that's a little older. So a little bit more modern. We've got Ultimate Fallout number 4. And you can probably make a guess, in this one, but maybe it's not obvious, because obviously we see a lot of books graded that aren't 9.8s, right? First appearance of Miles Morales. And this is another one where you should really only get this book graded if it's a 9.8. I mean, you can see here, like, there haven't been any super high grade sales in 4 months, but even the most recent one, 355, 384, like, look at that, 9.6, it's going for 375. It's just not worth it. 9.8, you're adding, $500 in value. 9.8, it is totally worth it. But when you get down into the 9 to 9.4, look at that, like 250 to 300, 9 to 9.4, 219, 294, 300. Again, it's just not worth it. A fine going for 225, 240, and down here, 174. Like, this is a book that unless you've got a 9.8, it is just not worth it. And this is where those pre-screens really come into play. You pre-screen the book. If you don't hit that number, then you just get it back. You only lost like $8 plus the shipping. And then you just sell the book raw. If you're trying to sell, that is the value in things like pre-screens. Now I'm going to show you another book. And this is where we're going to jump back to something that's a little higher value. And this is where this whole premise of not grading and things starts to fall apart. And so we're going to look at Silver Surfer number 1. So Silver Surfer number 1, this is the one from 1968. And, awesome early Silver Surfer book, Silver Age. Now this book, it is almost any grade that you would want to get this one graded. There are a couple exceptions in there where you see some outliers and that kind of stuff. But for this book, I mean, a fine going for 438, 367 here. When you go over to the graded, $600, $700. Even here, when you've got you get a little closer when you get down into the 5 to 5.5, where you're around 450 to 500. It gets close to that edge. And then you also see like a little, there's some weird sales in here, but I mean, these are the actual sales numbers. So somebody paid that for a raw book, $478 for a 3 to 4.5. And obviously that was worth it for that person to sell it raw. But then when you get back down into the lower grades again, 1.5 to 2 or 2.5, it's about a $200 book. And here it's about a $300 book, about $100 in extra value. So I feel like pretty easily you can say at about a 6.0 or better. And this is when you start getting up into higher values, $600, $700, $800. Like you're no longer below that $500 price point. 6.0 or better, it is worthwhile to get a book like this graded. It also seems to be worthwhile to get it graded if it's a really low grade, like a 2.0. It's like you can just command at least a certain amount of value there with the graded copy. So Silver Surfer #1, this is where you really start to see the difference there between what you're getting with like Copper Age and then jumping back to Silver Age, where you've got a 6.0 or better. Like that's a big range that is just worthwhile to get it graded. You add that value. And it's just because when people start spending this amount of money, they want a little more guarantee on what they're getting. This is also a book that is very often, people touch it up, color touch because of the black background. And they want to make sure they're not getting a copy that's been touched up, which has a significant value impact on their book. Now, I do want to point out some, caveats to this. There is some nuance to all of this. When you're selling books raw, you have a much higher risk of return of that book. If the person buying it doesn't agree with the grade or whatever, they decide there's some problem that they don't like, I feel like your risks of return are higher with a raw book than with a graded book, especially if you're pushing the limits when you're selling it. Like with Copper Age books, if you're saying that book is a 9.4, a 9.6, a 9.8, you're taking some gambles there as a seller. You've also got how long that book sits to sell, because that is something that I've experienced as well. It just, when you're talking about higher grades or certain types of books, sometimes like the raws will just sit longer. It's not always the case, but sometimes they will just sit longer. So you got to think about your time. And that's not something that gets portrayed in any of these types of metrics. So it's something you have to always consider there. And then also, like I was talking about with the raw sales, yes, you can find those outliers a lot of times where it's like, yeah, look, this raw book sold for more than this graded book. But that's sometimes you just catching that one buyer at the end of the rainbow. That is a single outlier, not necessarily the entire picture. And that's why I wanted to show this with a larger set of data where you're looking at lots of different raw sales versus lots of different graded sales. So you can really see when it is worthwhile on average to get different books graded. And so I just say, like, I use a lot of different pricing services, and this is one of the big values that I see in Cover Price, is that you have those raw sales and the graded sales, and you can do that direct comparison. And if you're trying to decide, should I get this book graded, this can really be a useful piece of information, something useful to check to help you make that financial decision. Also really shows you when you should be looking to buy a graded book instead of a raw book. I mean, I really do think it's interesting how on some books it's really swung to the opposite side, where people are paying more for raw books than graded in the same condition, which is just crazy to me. But hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit that like button, subscribe button, notification bell, and I will see you on the next one.